A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
It seems like politics, policy and even the democratic process has been hijacked across the Western world in recent years. Extremist groups are attempting to create society norms through legislation that are far removed from biblical truth. This is already evidenced in areas such as personal freedoms, gender change and same-sex relationships. There is a church and state conference in Perth in August, and to discuss the significance of this event, we are joined today by the Australian Christian Lobby's WA State Director, Peter Abetz. Peter, welcome.
It's good to be with you.
Peter, as stated in the introduction, there is such a move towards extremism in our societies across the West now, and it's never been more important than now, has it, for Christians and churches and church leaders in particular to try and stand up against this tide?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right, because historically people have always said politics is downstream of culture. But what's actually happening in politics now is that extreme groups, they use their lobbying power and their influence on the media, etc., to actually change society. So in effect, what's happened is politics is actually, if you like, part of the dynamic of culture, in the sense that people are trying to change the culture through politics. And that's something that a lot of Christians just don't realise. And so I think this conference will be really, really helpful in encouraging them to see what they can do and just how important it is. Because if the Christian voice is never heard, we are going to be in deep trouble.
Well, absolutely. And there's some very real victims from this, what we call culture wars. And an example is a beautiful young lady that the Australian Christian Lobby brought out from California recently, Chloe Cole, is a real-life example to me, a 19-year-old woman who, because of the change in society that was brought about, like you said, through legislation as much as anything, she underwent gender change therapy at a very young age, and to the point where they chopped off parts of her body and to become a male, and she's now 19 and she wants to be female, she wants to be a wife and a mother one day, and she's now facing this horrible reality that her body can no longer function like a woman's body in the nurturing of children. And I watched that interview or that presentation she did in Brisbane here, and I also interviewed her on the radio, and it was very, very difficult, Peter, to even listen to her story. It was just so horrible.
Yeah, look, that's very, very true. And we have the situation, for example, in Victoria, where they've got what's commonly referred to as the conversion therapy law, which doing anything other than affirming a child in their chosen gender identity is actually a criminal offence. You can go to jail for up to 10 years, and I think it's a fine of $100,000 or $200,000. If little Johnny comes home and says, "I want to be a girl from now on," if the parents don't go along with that, it becomes a criminal offence. And that's the sort of nonsense that's actually going on in our society. And unless Christians stand up and make their voices heard, society will continue to go in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and as we've said, there are very, very real victims to these changes in our society. And you also mentioned that, culture used to be downstream of the church, but like you said, historically in Australia, and I was a pastor once, Peter, you just didn't talk about politics from the pulpit, because the pulpit was for the Word of God, it was for the church, it was for the kingdom of God, and you kind of just left politics to the politicians. And up until a very few years ago, the average politician wasn't doing that much that was really anti-Christian, but it seems like now more than ever, the church leaders in Australia have to stand up, don't they, and push back against some of these changes. Otherwise, we're going to end up in a society where people are going to struggle just to live a normal Christian life.
Look, you're absolutely right. If you go back in history in Australia, whether you were Labor or Liberal, in a church setting, the issue was not about basic moral values. The issue would be, should sales tax be 10 or 15% or 20%, or should a road be built here or there? And the church and pastors didn't want to get involved in that, and rightfully so, because there are things on which Christians can have a difference of opinion. But when it comes to actually making it effectively illegal to give expression to what is our Christian faith and our Christian belief, our Christian values, that ought to really concern everyone. And kind of totalitarianism that's coming our way, which if we don't push back on it, it will really become much more difficult to even preach the gospel openly in our nation. And some people thought that's exaggerated. Hey, mark my words, it is coming to that stage unless we really make our voices heard.
Yeah, which brings us to the WA Church and State Conference. So, in a nutshell, especially for our WA listeners, tell us the purpose or the agenda behind this Church and State Conference.
Look, the purpose of it is to generate awareness amongst the Christian community of what's going on in politics, and also to equip them to actually engage in that space. Because, for a lot of people, they don't have a lot of understanding of the political process, so there'll be some talks that will help explain how the political processes work in our state and in our nation, and how they can actually engage in the process. And it's not that everybody's got to become an MP. There's lots of just little things that ordinary mums and dads and single young people or grandparents can actually do. As I often say to our ACL supporters in Western Australia, we've got about 25,000 supporters here in Western Australia. If each of them just every 3 months sent an email to an MP, well, that would be 100,000 emails hitting MPs' boxes. Because of the numbers that we have as Christians, if we actually all act, we can make a very significant difference.
Absolutely. And you've got some great speakers coming along to the Church and State Conference. Do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the speakers?
Yeah, look, the Honourable Nick Goyron, he is a member of the Legislative Council in the upper house here in Western Australia since 2008 or 9 actually, and he's been very, very robust in his pro-life, pro-family stance in the Parliament. So he's always well worth listening to. He's the one who drove the whole babies born alive issue here in WA and exposed that.
Can I ask, is he an independent politician or is he aligned to one of the major parties?
He's a Liberal Member of Parliament.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. He's one of the things a lot of people don't realise is that in the National Party and the Liberal Party, you actually have a conscience vote on everything, in the sense that if you in good conscience really cannot support a piece of legislation, then you are as long as you tell them in the party room beforehand, that then gives you the freedom to vote against it on the floor of Parliament, which you wouldn't get away with that with the Greens or the Labor Party. They don't give you that liberty. So that's one of that's what makes it easier for people like Nick Goyron to operate. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a more conservative value, isn't it? That personal freedom and that personal choice and that personal responsibility, as opposed to following a collective line of thinking, which, as you said, you aren't allowed to cross the floor when you're in the Labor Party, are you, when they make a policy decision? Yeah. But who else have you got coming along? Yeah,
we've got Reverend Dr. Campbell Markham. He's an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church. He's a great church historian. We've got Michelle Pearce, the CEO from the Australian Christian Lobby. She'll be speaking. And Sherry Sufi, Dr. Sherry Sufi, he's a political commentator and an author, and is a very, very smart guy, very involved in policy kind of issues, and often sought after commentator by the media. And then we've got myself. I'll be speaking on the religious freedom and what's at stake in the whole issue going on with our Christian schools or faith-based schools, because it affects Muslim and Jewish schools as well. The attempt to force the LGBT agenda into the schools. So I'll be speaking on that and showing people what they can actually practically do to help push back against that. And Marika Grunewald, who is has been very passionately serving the WA community for many, many years. She is the State Director of the Australian Christians. That's a political party.
She's actually been a guest of ours on 2020. She speaks very well, Marika.
Yes, she does. In fact, with the change in the legislation for the way our upper house gets elected that Mark McGowan introduced recently, there's every chance that Marika will actually become a upper house member, because you only need now 2.68% of the vote to get someone into the upper house. So that really augurs well for Marika, and I'm certainly hoping that she will get in, because she's an excellent speaker and very clearly articulates the Christian position in a lot of things. And she's got a background in community development, working in remote Aboriginal communities and so on. So she's always well worth listening to. And, of course, there's Dave Pello, who heads up the Church and State organisation. So I forgot Pastor Jordan Thyra, who he heads up Providence Church in Midland. And he's an excellent apologist. He's worked in that space. And so, again, very looking forward to his input as well.
It is a star-studded, I shouldn't say star-studded, it's a solid lineup of speakers, and I'm sure everyone will be blessed who gets along to it. Now, it's on the 10th of August, the Church and State Conference in Perth, in the beautiful state of WA, and if people want to find out about it, is there a link to the ACL website they can go to, Peter?
It's probably best to go straight to Church and State website. If you just Google Church and State Perth, it'll pop up. And you've got the information, and people can register directly.
And register for that conference, and it will be a blessing, and it definitely is time for Christians to stand up and be aware of what's going on and engage in our political process so that we can actually be the salt and light of our society. But Peter Abetz, the State Director for the Australian Christian Lobby in WA, I want to thank you so much for joining us on 2020 today.
Lovely to be with you, and I hope I see some of your listeners in WA at the conference.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.